G'day, Ed. Happy Monday, mate.
Hey, buddy, how you doing? Pretty big weekend down there for you guys.
It's been a huge...
I'm all over the place, huh?
Yeah, it's been a huge weekend for me. Went down and saw the mother-in-law down in Goulburn, which was really nice. So the weather was nice. It was a nice Sunday drive to get away and get away from the news desk, so to speak. There's been a lot going on over the weekend and plenty happening. What about you, mate? Did you do anything fun? Get some downtime?
No downtime. It was all business this weekend, man. But I got an awful lot done. There's so many things going on, it was all work. And then I had to find time to put together my segment for today on top of everything else. So, yeah, it was nonstop. And, geez, I'm not supposed to be working this hard. I mean, what the hell?
Well, you come and work over here on the Unspoken Truth with the Taskmaster himself. That's what's going to happen, right?
That's right. And I've got the scars to prove it to everyone.
Well, if it's any consolation, Ed, I've got some great things to show you in the next day or so at the unspokentruth.com.au. Lots rolling out there. The website's nearly finished. The community's been put together. Got a couple of masterclasses in there. I put the Go All In masterclass in there yesterday. That was pretty exciting. There's like 8-9 modules of content in there. That's my signature masterclass. We've got the how to monetize your knowledge in there. I've got a whole bunch of gold and silver stuff in there as well, and I need to connect with you to get the trading stuff in there as well. So I'm looking forward to bringing that to life for people for just $15 a month or 50 cents a day. It's going to be a great place to protect yourself so you can limit your exposure to the banks. You can get some money into some gold and silver and lock in the value of it today and create some passive or some streams of passive recurring income. And we've got a couple of things that we can show you in there. I'll show you how I do it myself personally, how I do it for my clients, and we'll help you with some programs there as well. So it's very, very exciting to be rolling that out and making all of that happen. But before we talk more about all of that, Ed, let's get into today's show, shall we? There's been a lot going on over the weekend, and one of the alarming indicators that you've been talking about for a little while is all of that buy now, pay later loan stuff. That must be some sort of indicator that's not been reported on by mainstream media. And here at the Unspoken Truth, ladies and gentlemen, if this is your first time here, you're going to get a good peek behind the curtain of actually what we do here. It's looking at the mainstream reporting that's out there, and we'll peel back the curtain and show you exactly what's going on behind that curtain, and we'll show you the unspoken truth there of what's happening and what that actually means for you as an individual. I'm going to talk a little bit about the 4 Russian friendly fire incidents. The Russians shot down 4 of their own aircraft in one afternoon. Winner, chicken dinner, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. That's what actually happens. I don't know, there's some other funny cliches that I could have in there. I was trying not to laugh, but I shouldn't laugh at the expense of the death of the enemy. But they are the enemy in the end, so what do? And coupled with that, I'm going to talk about Zelenskyy touring Europe in his jumper and his tracksuit pants, shaking hands with world leaders, asking for billions of dollars. It's kind of, I don't know what to say about it, man. I'm like, dude, just have a shave and put a suit on, man. Come on, man. Why can't you do that, man? I know, like, you're busy and, it's not like you're on the front line in Bakhmut or something like that and you're in a trench with your mates. You're in an office. And come on, man, get out of your jumper. It's like a really bad look for everybody. So anyway, I think that's a very funny and I think in some ways a pretty rude thing that he does. He went and addressed the American Congress in a jumper, man. What the hell is wrong with this guy?
I mean, he has to. Someone must have advised him that that's the look you need to have.
I don't know why it's funny, man, but the guy, he's just who advised him to have that? Like, he's an actor and stuff. He would have been used to wardrobe and he would have been used to makeup and talking points and all of those things, and he just doesn't have them.
I'm sure he did do all the makeup. I'll bet 5 minutes before he walked out he probably had the makeup people looking at him just the way a corrupt guy in Ukraine should look. This is what we have to go for. We have to maximize the thug look.
Yeah, it's terrible, man. It's like a really bad look. I can't imagine the Prime Minister of Australia going out in his tracksuit pants and his bloody South Sydney jersey like that as he goes out there and stuff.
Or maybe when war breaks up between you and New Guinea, maybe he'll maybe he'll don military garb.
Maybe something will happen there. Sorry. I'm sorry, Ed. I've got the giggles this morning with Zelenskyy and his stupid jumper, man. I just, and I'll show you why I've got the giggles, because I've made a couple of graphics as I was going to talk about it. I've you know, he's with the Italian Prime Minister, and she looks like $1 million, you know, in her expensive clothes, and the French president looks like $1 million in his expensive suit, and and he's wearing a freaking jumper he's been wearing for the same like last year. It's ridiculous. Anyway, enough about Zelensky's jumper. Tell us a little bit about the alarming increase of buy now, pay later loans. For people that don't know what that is, can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, actually, you know, I'm trying to bring up the report I just did on this guy, but I don't know how to load it here in this new system. So let me give me a second to bring up the my.
Well, while you're doing that, I'll just I'll bring the audience into buy now, pay later. That is something that is absolutely massive here in Australia, and it has seen explosive growth over the last couple of years. And, you know, another way to call buy now, pay later are microloans. They're microloans that people really give to themselves, and it's just a different form of credit that's actually out there. So there's a couple of different companies here in Australia that really dominate the market. The first one is called Afterpay, and the other one is its you know, red-headed stepchild called ZipPay. And I think there's 3 or 4 other ones that are out there as well. But Afterpay is the 400-pound gorilla. That's the absolute juggernaut here in Australia. And virtually every store that you see in Australia in a retail outlet has the ability for Afterpay or ZipPay. And I see the stickers on the windows there. And I remember when they first came out, I saw that. And I remember thinking, it's just a modern-day form of lay-by. But all they did, it was recreate the way that lay-by actually worked. You had lay-by in America, didn't you? For sure.
It doesn't sound familiar.
Lay-by doesn't sound familiar. I remember back. So
like layaway.
What do you call it?
You call it layaway.
So back in the day, tell me if it's the same thing. Back in the day, you would go into an outlet like Target or Kmart. You know, that's our version of, you know, the old school stores, and you would pick up what you want and you take it to the back counter, and that would then, so you'd give it to them, and then you'd lay by it, and you'd pay X amount of dollars per week until you paid the thing off. And if you didn't pay it off, they held on to the stock. But what it meant was the store would have to hold on to the stock and manage the logistics of it all. So all the buy now, pay later loans Afterpay did, was reinvent the way that lay-by worked. They would finance they'd front the consumer, so the store then actually got paid, and then they didn't have to handle the logistics of the actual stock as well. Right. It's a genius business model. It's a really, really great business model, and it helped retail here in Australia no end. In fact, I have Afterpay as a supplier of photography services here in Australia, because we've had a couple of questions whenever we sell a wedding package, the price of it varies from $2,000 to about $4,000. And sometimes people say, "Oh, do you have Afterpay for that?" And we say, "Well, look, you know, we have Afterpay, or we can just split the payment for you," which makes it easy for them, and it stops all the interest and all of that stuff. So I kind of circumvent that. But if I was doing something that was high volume, like on a daily basis, I'm not selling weddings every day, of course, but if I'm selling something high volume, then I definitely don't want to be splitting the payments and managing logistics or something like that. Just let Afterpay or ZipPay take care of it. And it's super easy for me as a retailer to actually get that signed up, and it's plugged into the FPOS machine that I've actually got. So when people come into the studio, they can tap their card, they can use all of that. So it's a very, very efficient system. And, you know, the people that created that got scale here in Australia really quickly, and they rolled it out really quickly. It was one of those massive Australian success stories. But man, the other side of that is pretty nasty. I can see that you've got your video lined up there. I'll jump out of the stream there and I'll let you take over, mate.
I got to figure it out. If I have to, I'll just do it. I don't know how to start this video. Any idea? The increased use of buy now, pay later loans. This is a real indication of what's going on in the economy, and it's very worrisome. Let's talk about it. Okay, so what I try to do is I try to look for little clues, little signs out there, little signposts that tell us about the true health of the markets and people's finances. And in the spirit of that, I found one indication that's very worrisome, and I want you to be aware of it. And in the description below, can you let us know whether you have been using buy now, pay later loans? Let's start with a quick little video that helps explain what's going on with these BNPL loans.
Buy now, pay later isn't just financing Gen Z's online shopping habits. It's helping families put food on the table. U.S. consumers are increasingly using the installment loans to pay for everyday items, including groceries. That's highlighting the financial pain brought from the worst inflation outbreak in 4 decades. To have a nutritious diet, a family of 4 must spend at least $1,000 a month on groceries, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And that's up about $675 from 2 years ago. Now, almost half of Americans have used buy now, pay later apps. And of those, about 1 in 5 rely on them to buy groceries. And some 27% are using the loans as a bridge to their next paycheck. The buy now, pay later model has allowed users to spread payments out evenly without accruing interest. And that's made it an attractive alternative to credit cards, especially when interest rates are hitting their highest level since 2007. But that convenience can turn into a catastrophe if users fall behind on payments and allow late fees to pile up. That can hurt your credit score, which is particularly dangerous to younger consumers and people of color, who tend to have less wealth to begin with.
Okay, so I don't think there's a whole lot of explaining here that I need to do on my part to illustrate the fact that people are having to resort to these buy now, pay later loans to pay for living expenses just to survive. And I saw many reports. This is just one little quick explanation video. The fact is that the use of BNPL loans has been exploding. And people would only use them if they had to, right? And this is indicative of what's going on out there in the overall health of the economy and of people's ability to make a living, to make ends meet. And by the way, the economy is starting to affect every level of consumer out there, not just the poor people. The wealthy, believe it or not, are starting to hit the unemployment rolls. Let's take a look. This is out of Zero Hedge. Let's take a look at this chart. Okay, now this green line, this represents the initial jobless claims, and you can see how it has been going up very sharply here. Now the red line represents continuing job loss claims. So these are people who have been on unemployment for a while, and they're staying on unemployment. But you can see they're all going up. So we're seeing initial unemployment going up, and we're seeing continuing unemployment going up. But more importantly, look at this. This chart shows a change in the number of households receiving unemployment benefits through direct deposit. Okay, these are unemployment benefits, right? And these have all been going up very sharply since last August. And you see the silver line? This represents the higher income earners. See, 125,000 plus. And it has been outpacing the other income demographics. Now, they've all been going up, but I just wanted to illustrate that every social class is being hit here. And this has been going on since August. Why is this not being reported on in the mainstream media? Let's take a look at this chart. This is the after-tax wages and salaries growth by income group. And every income group is being hit. So you can see that unemployment increase and wage decrease have been hitting every economic group. So these are the little clues that you want to be looking at to kind of determine the health of the economy. So reduce your exposure to your bank, put some of your money into gold and silver, and establish streams of passive recurring income. All right, so let's bring Rob in. All right, so
all right. Once again, well done.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Hey, I want to pull on a thread first before we go to the loan part there. She said in that report that consumers, excuse me, a family of 4 need to spend $1,000 a month on groceries, but then she kind of just brushed over the fact that that had gone up by $675 from a year ago. So hang on, what?
Yeah.
Hang on. Last year it was $325, and now it's $675. That's like a 3x increase. So you're telling me that groceries are now $1,000 a month for a household, but before, a year ago, they were $325 a month. What? What kind of inflation is that, man? That's not like 4%. 4% my ass.
Exactly right. That's more than a double. Far more than a double.
It's a triple.
Yeah. I know.
300%.
Yeah, but remember, our inflation numbers, they X out food and housing. So that's what you can't trust these government numbers.
Yeah, you can't trust what they're giving to you. Well, what you can trust is those charts that you were showing there, right? So those charts are coming from the government, and that's statistics. And those statistics showing that alarming increase of high income earners, $125,000 a year more now on Social Security, now needing those buy now, pay later loans for it to actually be meaningful. What do you think it is? What type of indicator is this? This is a bit of a lagging indicator because we're seeing this information come through, but it's also a leading indicator showing us that consumers are really hurting because of inflation that's out there. But they're bridging the gap to cover off the inflation that's out there. So the measures that the government use in terms of raising interest rate to cause more pain, to lower the spending and take the heat out of the economy is not really working because, as that lady said in her report, people are using the buy now, pay later loan to bridge the gap to the next paycheck, which stops the pain that the government are trying to inflict onto you. So what do you think is going to be the net result of that? Because we haven't seen that before, because these things didn't exist in 2008.
Yeah. Well, no, I would consider this a leading indicator because the consumer it's the most sensitive to their own personal financial situation, right? And the government might not pick up on it until a little bit later. It might not, reflect in their overall zeitgeist until a little bit later. But the consumers, they're right there. They're more sensitive to the day-to-day changes in their lives. And it takes a while for the powers to be to realize what's good. No, I'd consider it a leading indicator. But listen, I call these, little signposts. These are not little signposts. These are pretty big signposts. Anybody, if little old Ed Anderson in Wayzata, Minnesota can see this stuff, you would think that some guy at the Fed in in some room down the hallway would see it too. And let their bosses. I mean, what? So you can't trust what these people are saying. They probably do see this, but they're not going to let it out that they've seen it or that they're doing, because then they've got to do something about it. And heaven forbid they should do something about it. They have their own agenda, so they paint the picture that they want you to see.
Does this fall into the same category or the same bucket, if you like, as the consumer credit? So people are using credit cards to buy groceries, albeit slightly, it's just a different form of credit, right? Buy now, pay later. And credit card is you're buying now and you're paying straight away in the form of interest. So we've seen explosive growth. I'm certain if you pull out those graphs, I've been watching a bunch of finance channels showing us that that's off the chart as well. And part of the reason it's off the chart is because of inflation. And again, it come back to what that lady said. She described it so eloquently when she said people are using credit to bridge the gap from today's lack of money in their bank account to next week's paycheck. And they're okay, they can manage that. But that can only go on for so long because eventually the gap in credit becomes larger and larger and your credit needs to become more and more to cover that gap between today and the next paycheck because inflation is going up and additional costs are being put into you. So then the government pain starts to actually come home to roost for you, which is what the government want. The government have mismanaged the economy so bad that they have to inflict pain on everyday consumers in order for them to actually fix the mistakes that they've made. It's unbelievable, really.
Yeah, when you consider, remember, with the banking crisis that's going on right now, and we've been telling you guys for a while now, the banks are going to start reducing credit lines, okay? Because they can't afford it. You're going to see all these banks reducing your credit card limits, reducing how much you can get for your mortgage, reducing your building loan. There's going to be the credit crunch has already started in the banks. Right? So that includes the credit cards. So let's say you have a credit card that you want to max out, which is not a good idea, but you're desperate, you have to. Well, they're going to be cutting. If they haven't already, they're going to be cutting your credit limits on your credit cards. And so we're in a really dicey area here, Rob. Like you said, people can only pull so many rabbits out of the hat. And people would not be resorting to these kind of loans unless they had to, right? So that this indicates to me that more and more people are at the end of the ropes, and they're looking for whatever little life vest they can find to get them through the week, to feed their kids for that week. And so when the people are resorting to these kind of products more and more, it's a huge red flag. Now, maybe a lot of people are saying, well, I'm going to max out my credit card while I can, while I still have a credit limit. And I will hope that the government will bail me out in one form or another down the road. Which is not moral, right? You're taking out a loan. When you take out a loan, even if it's on a credit card, you're responsible for that, man. Hey, you made an agreement. Yeah, I'll pay you back. But what I hate to say it, but what a lot of people do is they take out large loans. They extend themselves, assuming that the government will come up with some kind of a savior down the road, or they'll file for bankruptcy, or they'll find a way out of it later on. Right now, they're just trying to pay the bills. Right now, they're just trying to feed the family, and that can only go on for a certain period of time. And when you have to pay the piper, it can be a very nasty. I still think that when that final straw goes on the camel's back and things fall out of it, you're going to wake up one day and 2008 is going to look like the good old days.
There's just really a couple of solutions to it. It's becoming the mantra on this channel, and it's just about reducing your exposure to the bank. So only have what you need to have in the bank, maybe 3 months worth of bills. Get yourself some gold and silver, take your money out and put it into an asset where the actual value of it's locked in. Gold and silver, property, whatever you choose. Gold and silver is like the time-tested thing. It's very simple. And then you've got possession of it as well. That way it can't be taken away from you. And then the solution in my mind, my whole entrepreneurial life when I left the military in 2002, if there was problems, if I couldn't afford something, my solution was always to make more money. But it's not until you realize that you can't continuously swap your time for money to solve those problems. And it's a bit of a throwaway line, stop complaining about how expensive things are and just work more. Well, I can only work so many hours per week. I can really only fit in 50 or 60 hours a week at a maximum, working 12 hours a day because I'm trying to live a life and not kill myself and die in the process. But if you can figure out a way to get some leverage and leverage the cash flow that you've got and create more cash flow with that, that will help you to bridge the gap. You won't need a buy now, pay later loan. You won't need a credit card because you've got cash flow coming from multiple streams of income. And that is just like a dead simple way of solving this financial crisis. Even if you had an extra $200 per week and it paid for some groceries and it paid for some petrol for your car, that would make a huge difference in most people's lives where you don't have to think about that. Or that spare $200 can then maybe be spent on entertainment. You're going out, having dinner with your missus, or you're going seeing friends. Or if you were smart about it, you'd pay down some debt with that extra $200 and live within your means. The point is, if you had an extra $200 a week, it doesn't take much to make a difference in people's lives, particularly if you're struggling. If you're on the breadline and you're having a hard time and you need to use Afterpay or Zip Pay or some form of buy now, pay later to actually bridge the gap between here and there, then maybe creating some passive recurring income streams is the way to go. And that can be done really easily. There's so many programs out there that you can join. There's so many things that you can join. And here at The Unspoken Truth, we're going to show you some really simple ways of getting that done in the next couple of days. In fact, I'm going to launch that this week, so I'm excited to be bringing that to life. Did you want to add anything to that, Ed? Because that's always been your mantra. That's been the mantra your whole life, is to create that passive income, right?
Yeah. Well, listen, a couple of years ago, it was nice to have a side hustles or some form of and a little extra money coming in through passive income. It's always nice to have a little extra money. These days, it's not a luxury anymore. You have to do it. The only way you're going to be able to keep up or get ahead of inflation is with a passive income stream. And it's even more important for people who do have 9-to-5 jobs because you're constrained. There's only a finite number of dollars you're going to bring in every month, even with your, if you put in extra hours, you're locked in. So for people who have actual 9-to-5 jobs, it's even more important for you to develop, passive income streams. If you're going to spend your life, trading your time for money, it's going to be almost impossible for you to become actually wealthy. So job is not just a word; it's also an acronym for just over broke, right? So you gotta. So yeah. Shout out to Mark, who said hello to. Hey, Mark. I don't know if you're still watching. He's still watching. So, hey, Mark. Thanks for checking in.
We've got a couple of people joining us in the live stream here today. Ladies and gentlemen, if this is your first time here at The Unspoken Truth, welcome. Ed and I are live here every day at the same time, 5:30 Sydney time. At what time Minnesota time? 2:30? 3 o'clock Minnesota time. We're live every day, every weekday that is. So that's Tuesday through Saturday here in Australia and Monday through Friday in the US. If this is your first time here, we've also got a podcast. So if you can't plug into the YouTube version of that, you can always plug into the Spotify version of it. As soon as the episode's finished, I download the file and upload it into Spotify, and you can find it where you get all good podcasts. So if you're an Apple user, you can find it in Apple Podcasts. Takes a couple of hours to pull through there, or wherever you listen to podcasts, you can get The Unspoken Truth. We're also over on Twitter, Telegram, and Rumble, and I encourage you to come on over and join us on Telegram, because I post a whole lot of things over there and a little bit more frequently than I do in YouTube, because YouTube is that platform that continuously censors us for speaking the truth. And the channel here is called The Unspoken Truth, and we want to talk about things that give you some different perspective. Just be careful if you're coming over to Telegram and having a look there, because there's some triple R 18 plus rated war type content in there. So just be careful what you're clicking on if you're a little bit sensitive to those things. But I'm showing you those things and posting them in there to give you the real story and give you the unspoken truth of what's actually happening in the war in Europe, because the narrative would have you believe one thing and we've got something completely different going on. So let's shift gears to the second story today, which is a pretty big story. Zelenskyy has been traveling around Europe, pimping himself out and shopping himself through Europe, buying weapons, running around in his jacket and his jumper, while the billionaire Goldman Sachs banker there is wearing an expensive suit. The least Zelenskyy can do, man, is put on a suit, as we were saying. He's not doing that for whatever reason and what's happening. So there's a pretty big announcement there when he went over to the UK. So they came out and said that they're going to give him more long-range drones with a 200-kilometre range, and that's coupled with the Storm Shadow missiles that they've been given. And it's been confirmed that there's more than 200 Storm Shadows that have been handed over to the Ukrainians so far. Zelenskyy went from there in the UK to meet the Italian Prime Minister in his jumper. It looks like he might have changed his jumper from there, or he's got a jacket and a jumper on there. He took his jacket off there for her. You know, she's in her expensive Italian clothes and, you know, all the pomp with the band and the military there, and he just rocks up like with a funny look on his face. He hung out with her for a couple of hours to try and get some more air defense missiles and a bunch of other things, and taking everything he can from the Italians. Then he went over here to the Pope. I'm not sure he was there. I think he might have been praying for forgiveness for asking for all of this stuff, and then for his poor dress code. Then he headed over to Germany and he changed his jumper again into a different one that says United 24 there. And then he headed over to France to see the bank teller himself. And he couldn't even be bothered changing from the German guy to the French guy, all in an effort to go away and get some of these expensive toys for his country. Now, the British also came out and said that they were going to start training. I'm not sure what's happening here, that they came out and they said that they were going to start training Ukrainian pilots on F-16s. And it's a bit of a head scratcher for me, because the British don't have F-16s. The British have got Eurofighters, they've got Hawks, and they've got F-35. So the Brits are training them in what? And the Dutch have come out and said that, hey, we'll give you our fighter jets, no problems here, we'll give them to you. So maybe the Dutch fighter jets are going to head over to the UK, all of the training's going to happen in that part of the world. But they said that that is something that's inevitable, and that's beginning and that's happening. So this is a real escalation of what's happening. There's a great interview with Zelenskyy, who's the boss of the Ukrainian military. So for the first time in a year since this conflict has started, he sat down with a Ukrainian reporter and he gave an interview for an hour. And he talks about what's been going on, and you see the guy behind it. So imagine if you were in World War II and you got to sit down with Winston Churchill, or you got to sit down with, Eisenhower or Patton or someone like that. This is actually what you're seeing. That's what's happening in real time. And one of the questions that was asked in that interview, he says, would you compare this to World War I or World War II? And the general says, I think World War I. Just the amount of ordnance that have been expended, it's equivalent to what happened in World War I. So it just kind of shows you the level of intensity of the conflict, because you think of World War I and you go, 60,000 people were killed in one day in that particular location. And, while we're not seeing that level of casualty happen on the battlefield, we are seeing the similar amount of ordnance being expended mostly from the Russian side to begin with, but then it also kind of came up to parity with the Ukrainian side, but then it all died off because everyone ran out of weapons, and it's all kind of died in the arse a little bit now. There's been a few developments on the map in the last couple of days as well, with the Ukrainians taking back quite a bit of ground over near Bakhmut as well. And they said that that's the beginning of the counterattack. And they also came out and said that it's not going to be a counterattack or an offensive or an assault that's going to happen all at once. It's going to happen very slowly, and it's going to unfold in a bunch of different locations. But the fact that the British have handed over 200 Storm Shadow missiles and they've confirmed the long-range drones, that is a bit of a game changer in my view, because those long-range drones, while they don't have the same strike capacity or the same stealth capability as what the Storm Shadow missiles do, they give the Ukrainians a capability that they don't currently have, which is long-range over-the-horizon attack. And that's something that is definitely a game changer. The Russians, on the other hand, just kind of shrugged their shoulders at it. They're like, yes, so what? As they fire Caliber cruise missiles and X-55 and X-52 cruise missiles every other day, and they've got all the Iranian Shahed drones and their Lancet drones on the battlefield as well. So the Russians don't seem to be too concerned about that capability that the Ukrainians are getting, but I don't think that they understand actually what they're getting. I think they're underestimating the capability of those British drones. The interesting thing is that wherever you look, and I looked probably across 30 different sources to see what the British were giving them. And you know what they didn't say? They never said what sort of drones they're actually getting. And the British have got some really, really sophisticated technology that they've been working on in the background. And I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag here, but I can kind of disseminate exactly what it is that they're handing over. But the mainstream media is not reporting it because the British are not reporting it. And if you know anything about this kind of tech, then you could probably decide and kind of decipher what it would be by a process of elimination, and particularly when they start talking about the ranges that are actually there as well. But once again, I'm not going to let that cat out of the bag because it's not in the mainstream, and it's not for me to say actually what they're going to hand over to them, which is it's a pretty good capability. And it's something that could be a game changer because it can take out their air defenses, which gives the Ukrainians the opportunity to operate freely and to get the Storm Shadows closer to where they need to. So this thing comes in as a coordinated strike and a coordinated effort. Speaking of strike and effort, I want to shift gears because the swipe right and the swipe left in Europe with Zelenskyy has finished for the time being, as he's gone away and shopped around and got a couple more $1 billion worth of stuff for his military. This guy here, Prigozhin, has said that there was some friendly fire incidents that had happened. If you don't know, this guy here is the boss of the Wagner group. And there was 4 aircraft that were shot down in one day. So there was 2 helicopters, an Su-35 on the bottom left here and an Su-34 on the top left, were all shot down in one day. And it was shot down at this part of the map here. So right in the middle, there you can see next to Belarus, so just on the eastern side of Belarus and just on the very northern part of the Ukraine. So in that oblast there, those 4 aircraft were shot down, and Prigozhin came out and he said, here's where they were shot down in this location. And if you look at where the air defenses were positioned, the Russians were actually shooting themselves down. and the Ukrainians came out and went, well, there's 4 aircraft shot down, and they're like, hey, bro, was that you? Well, me, man. We don't even have air defenses up there pointing at Belarus up in that part of the, well, they probably do, right? But all these aircraft are shot down. It's all coming through on Telegram, right? You can't see it all. And I've got all the footage, but I can't show it to you here, right? I'm not allowed to show that stuff on YouTube. You're not allowed to show, like, explosions. And, well, the reason in some ways, I kind of agree with it, right? Because as soon as you see a missile hitting something, that's people dying, right? So this helicopter's getting shot down with 5 or 6 people in them. And, these 2 jets, the Su-34's got 2 people in it, no ejections or anything like that. And you're seeing the aircraft get hit with a missile and crash all the way to the ground. And, that's why YouTube doesn't allow you to show you that stuff on the platform. You can show the photos of it, but you're not even, so you get censored, right? They take the monetization off it and say, hey, you can't do that. And there's things that you can do to say, yes, this is sensitive content, but the minute you do that, then you reduce your exposure. So that's the reason why YouTube don't have it on there. But look, the footage is not anything that you wouldn't expect. It's not some overly scary thing. Either it's just a missile hitting a plane and a helicopter, but it's a Russian missile hitting a Russian plane or a helicopter. And I sort of, I wonder what on earth is going on. And the reason I say that, folks, here's the unspoken truth is, when I was in the Royal Australian Navy, I was a combat systems operator. And that's a fancy way of saying I was a radar, sonar, and electronic warfare operator. I didn't spend a lot of time on a sonar set because we simply didn't do that much ASW work. And when we did ASW work, it was more fun not to sit on the sonar, listening to all of the noise and whale farts that are going on there. It's not very exciting. I would rather be maneuvering the warship in a different position, which was way more fun because you're moving assets around. But most of the time, guided missile frigate that I was on and guided missile destroyer that I was on, what your job is to be a missile sponge for an aircraft carrier. So you would sit well in front of an aircraft carrier, 20, 30 miles to the front. And we never had the Aegis warship. We never had the Aegis system on our warship. So Aegis means that somebody is in charge of the surface action group. There's 5 or 6 ships on that group. And the Aegis system allows somebody to be in charge of that. And I could be 100 miles to the rear firing missile off a ship that's 150 miles to the northeast of me and controlling their fire control systems. So Aegis is an incredible system. We never had that. So it's all a manual type system. Radar spins around, operator like me sitting at a console making sure the computer track is on top of the radar signal, and then we create these fire control solutions and fire missiles at them. But there's a series of things that you go through to make that happen. The first thing that you go through is a series of things called warnings. So in NATO military, we have warnings. In Ukraine, I'm tipping that they don't have warnings because they know exactly where their air force is and their army and their airborne assets. But if Russian aircraft are coming across the border into Ukraine, we know that they're Russians because we can see with our radars where their tracks are. And the Americans are feeding intelligence to the Ukrainians as well. We've got rivet joint aircraft in the air. We've got AWACS in the air 24 hours a day. We know the disposition of exactly every single Russian asset on the battlefield. We know exactly where their stuff is. And it's just a matter of prioritizing which ones are the most highest value with which weapon systems to actually engage them with. So when the Russian aircraft look like they're going to come across the border, we're getting a heads up. And the weapon systems on the ground are turned on at the last second, so we're not targeted with anti-radiation missiles and plinked off the battlefield. But when you turn those systems on, there's systems that you use called IFF, identify friend from friend, friend from foe. Radar turns around and the return from the aircraft goes, "Oi, I'm on your side." So there's different things that you have from the aircraft side. You have a thing called mode alpha, mode Charlie, and mode 4. So Russians have a similar thing. So mode alpha identifies which aircraft it is. I can look it up and see the side number. This is in Western Air Force, but the Russians have the same thing. Mode Charlie tells me how high the aircraft is because it's reporting to you. And then mode 4 is the crypto. So if the aircraft doesn't have the right crypto loaded into the aircraft itself for that given day, then I need to call it up on the guard channel and go aircraft in vicinity of 290, 300 miles in from wherever. And that aircraft goes, "Oh, he's talking to me." And yes, that's me. Yes, I'm a friendly. And there's other ways that you go through identifying who they are if they haven't loaded the mode 4 into the aircraft properly. The Russians have all the same IFF stuff. So when the radar gets turned on, I know instantly whether that's a good guy or a bad guy. So I'm scratching my head thinking nobody in mainstream had reported that the Russians were shooting themselves down. It wasn't until this happy character came out and said that they were shooting themselves down that everyone was like, "Oh." And then the Ukrainians are like, "No, it wasn't us." But I don't know. Am I being an instrument and a mouthpiece of deep state here by saying that the Russians are shooting themselves down? Because I think of the whole reason I'm telling you about how the operation works is it's impossible for a Western It's impossible for a Western military to accidentally shoot down 4 aircraft in one day. 1 aircraft, maybe, yeah. 1, yes. I'll give you that mistake could happen. But 4 in the same afternoon? Come on, man. So what's happening there? Is it really the Russians shooting themselves down? in that part of the world? Or are the Ukrainians putting their air defenses right up against the border there? Because this activity happened within a 20-mile radius. The two helicopters here to the north, the Su-35 and the Su-34, and this is down here further is the border. This is inside of that oblast there in the map here that I showed you. So this is the oblast up in the middle of the screen where it says Belarus. You can't see my mouse because I'm not sharing my screen, but the red border there is where it's happening. So I just wonder, is that really happening, or have the Ukrainians moved up some mobile system? I don't think the Ukrainians have moved up. There's no chance of that happening. So if they have shot themselves down, what on earth is going on? What on earth is going on?
Well, I've got a theory. First of all, so whales fart, huh?
They do.
Okay, I didn't know that.
And you can hear the whales on your sonar as well, surprisingly.
Okay, so I've got a theory. Given the kind of conscripting that they're doing right now in Russia in order to keep their numbers up, that guy manning that missile system, right now, he might have been working at the vodka factory last week.
And see, I kind of went through that in my mind as well. Like maybe but nobody gets to sit at that console, and even if he was drunk, let's play that out for a second. Even if he was drunk, his mate is sitting next to him. He's not drunk, and the guy who's actually turning the key and pressing the button to fire the missile control officer, he would have to be off his face blind drunk as well to make it happen. Like it's not one person sitting there playing a video game like Call of Duty and going, fire the SAMs, and there's like a series of things you have to go to. And there's a series of escalations that you go through to make it happen as well. So then play that out with me for a second as well. They're over the border, actually in Russia itself, and the aircraft are flying in Russian airspace. The operators know the capabilities and limitations of the Ukrainians, because your job as the missile operator, as the air defense operator, is to know the capabilities of these aircraft and the enemy. So if you suspect that they're coming at you and they've got weapon systems that can engage you, meaning take out your radars and your complex where you're actually stationed, then you'll have to take appropriate actions to get the hell out of Dodge if they're coming for you. So we know, and the Russians know, that there's Su-24 and MiG-29 that could come at them, and maybe Su-27 as well. But in that part of Ukraine, the northern part of Ukraine, why would they come across the border and attack them there? And then the helicopters, when you see the footage of it, most of the helicopter activity you see on the battlefield in Ukraine is at about 20 feet. And the reason they're at 20 feet is they're flying nap of the earth, which is pretty normal for helicopters. They're flying nap of the earth, and the reason they're doing that is to use the terrain as cover from the man-pads, from the shoulder-fired SAMs. And the fighter jets are doing the same, albeit at probably about 100 feet. They're not quite as low as the helicopters, of course, but the Su-25s are still flying around at 100 feet. And when you see the footage of these helicopters flying around, they're at altitude. They're probably at 2,000 or 3,000 feet. So the Russian missile operator going, oh, look, the Ukrainian Mi-8s are coming at us at 3,000 feet. Let's fire 2 missiles. 1, 2. Like, no. The unspoken truth is that I believe, here's the unspoken truth, here's my hypothesis, that's actually deliberate. They're deliberately targeting themselves.
False flag?
No, discourse within the military.
Okay.
So Prigozhin has come out in the last couple of days, and, once again, I don't know if the Russian blogger, wannabe Prigozhin is truthful or not. It's very hard because, first of all, I don't speak Russian. I'm relying on translations that you see. But if you put all the pieces together of how cranky he is, last week he was standing in front of about 30 bodies of guys that had just been killed, and then getting upset with the Russian leadership saying, you caused this. I asked you to send ammunition. You didn't send ammunition. We've got no ammo. That's the reason these guys are dead. We've got no artillery. That's the reason these guys are dead. That's on you. And he's screaming and shouting and carrying on about it. Then he was threatening to leave. And then Gerasimov came over and Shoigu came over and said, no, we're going to get you the ammo. And he said, all right, I'll stay. And now I'm going to leave, and now I'm going to stay. And then he said he was going to pull out. And then he said he was going to pull out and withdraw from Bakhmut. And when he was going to withdraw, he said he was going to tell the Ukrainians where their positions were. So now the Ukrainians could go up and take the ground back. So so there's this internal discourse of what's going on and what's happening within the Russian military. And the truth is, there's absolutely no way that friendly fire at that scale could happen within the Western military. I'll give you one accidental shoot down, but how could you shoot down a helicopter at 3,000 feet when you know from as the missile operator, the footage, the tactics, the strategies, that every single helicopter on the battlefield, Russian and Ukrainian, is flying at 20 feet. And now you see aircraft over and above where you are, where your position is, to the north of you at 3,000 feet. How on earth could that be a Ukrainian helicopter? Impossible. And likewise, you see Russian Su-35 and Su-34 fighter and bomber aircraft to the south of where you are, tracking, looks like to the north or directly to the west of where you are at altitude, and you engage them. What would the Ukrainians be doing at altitude there? There's just no way a missile operator would make that mistake. There's no way. So I've got the graphic on the screen there. It says Russian friendly fire, but it's deliberate. So why would they be deliberately doing that? Because if a process of elimination from a lonely old combat systems operator like me can disseminate that, and they have these controls and these systems in place, and that stops friendly fire from happening, how did it happen 4 times in one afternoon? The only rational answer to that is it's all deliberate. It's not actually friendly fire. It's deliberate. Something's going on there.
Wouldn't these guys be worried about ending up in a firing squad?
Well, they would be.
Okay, well,
that's the level. That's the level of it, right? You just killed like 10 people and destroyed gazillions of dollars worth of assets. And these assets are being plinked off the battlefield systematically, and you're just doing it for them on their behalf. It's a really strange thing. The unspoken truth is that the people that are reporting on it, not a single person has said what I've said, because not a single reporter from CNN, from BBC, from ABC, from anywhere that's reported on this, any of those 20 or 30 sources that I looked at, is a missile operator. They're not, in the Americans, you call them operator specialists. In Australia, you call them combat systems operators. Not a single one of those has consulted anybody that's ever sat at a missile console or has been a Patriot operator or a Hawk operator, or on a warship, for heaven's sake, which is what we do, is air defense. They haven't asked. And they go, oh, it's Russian friendly fire. But it's not friendly fire. Because friendly fire like that is impossible. That doesn't happen. So there's something else going on there. Mark my words, and we'll see more about that soon.
Well, this could be a fascinating wrinkle that I didn't see coming. I mean, we've always heard the opinions of analysts out there that the Russians are disorganized, that they're all conscripts, they're not true professionals, and they just rely on pure volume of bodies in order to win, and all the rest of it. So I've heard that, but it never really occurred to me that there could be so much dissension in the ranks that they would start essentially turning around and shooting their officers. Now, actually, I have heard those stories of rank and file turning around and shooting the lieutenant because they didn't want to, but this is a very sophisticated level of, because if you turn around and shoot your lieutenant, you could probably say, "Oh yeah, well he was shot by the enemy." It was but if you launch a missile that you're in charge of,
it's not like crack. Who was that? I don't know. Like there's some version of some cover up that could happen there. I'll give you a couple of friendly fire incidents that have happened in the past. Yeah, and so MH17 is the most recent one everyone can think of, right? So MH17 happened over the Donbass, where the Russians had moved in the SA-11 missile system into that part of the world, and the guy who's actually responsible for that is a Russian blogger and podcaster, and he's constantly on all of the Telegram channels that I see, and every time I see that guy, I'm like, surely ACIS here in Australia and the CIA there in America can see that guy. He's the guy responsible. He's the guy that's been fingered. You must know exactly where that guy is. Why aren't you doing something about it? Why don't you go and collar him and bring him in? Whether he's in Russia or not, go and get him. He's the guy responsible for shooting down that airliner. So you would remember when that airliner was shot down, how did they do that? Why did they do that? Once again, you think, why would somebody shoot down an aircraft that was at 30,000 feet or whatever it was at, and it's tracking this way? And if you look at the radar data all day long, you can see airliners flying over the top of where you were for whatever reason they were in that part of the world. And they fired a missile at it, and they were thinking, did they do that to create an international incident? Nah, I don't think so. I think that was just complete and absolute and total incompetence. That's what that was. And the reason for that is the Russian military want to remain at arm's length from these Russian separatists, is what they call them, in the Donbass. So they've invaded in 2014, they invaded that part of the world. They're invaders. It doesn't matter what anybody says about Russian language speaking people and those people in that part of the world wanting to be part of Russia. All of that doesn't matter, because according to international law, the boundary of Ukraine, the border of Ukraine, the sovereign integrity of Ukraine was there. And the Russians stepped over it without being invited, and then they put their military in there and then shot down an airliner. But they remained at arm's length. And I remember there was the G20 meeting here in Brisbane. At the time, Tony Abbott was the Prime Minister, and someone said, are you gonna go and like ask Vladimir Putin about what, MH17, what the hell? There's a whole bunch of Australians that were killed on that flight. And Tony Abbott's like, yeah, I'm going to shirt front him and I'm going to do this and he never did anything, right? And Putin's like, it wasn't us. Just throws up his hands like, it wasn't us. Well, where did you get the surface-to-air missile? That wasn't in the Donbass, and you didn't buy that off the shelf on eBay, for heaven's sake. These guys are just liars, right? They're just full of shit, and it just continues to go. There was an incident in 1986 where an American aircraft, Ticonderoga, don't quote me there, shot down an Iranian Airbus. So it went through, and that's where the warning system was developed. So in the Navy, there's 7 systems of warning, 7 levels of warnings that you go through. So if an aircraft looks like it's coming towards you, you get up on the guard channel 243 or 121.5 and you transmit aircraft in position of blah, blah, bearing and range where it is, tracking in direction here. Please acknowledge that you are closing on my position. And in the Persian Gulf, it's not a very wide place between the north and the south. And if you're down the southern part of the Persian Gulf, where aircraft are launching from Iran to the north of you, they look like, because there's a couple of military bases in that part of the world, these aircraft would launch from there and they look like they would come out and have a look at you. And often the Iranian Air Force would come out and launch their fighter jets at you, but they would stay within inside of their territorial waters. But they were well entitled to come inside of international airspace and do whatever the hell they wanted as well. But sometimes they came out at very threatening profiles towards you, and they looked like they were actually flying a missile profile at you. Like he could fire an Exocet missile at you, or he could, he's on a profile to drop a bomb. And to do that, and the Americans accidentally shot down an Iranian airliner, and that happened. And again, there was one recently, the Iranians shot down a Ukrainian airliner that was leaving Tehran. That was another one. So these friendly fire incidents have happened several times throughout history, and there's probably more of them as well. But there's never been an incident where 4 aircraft have been shot down in one day over your airspace. So something else is going to come out of this, and all things being equal, we'll be able to report on that and give people an update and share the unspoken truth and what's really going on behind the curtain there, because I think it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what develops from that. And if your theory pans out, man, our subscribership should go through the roof, because you are the only one out there proposing that as a hypothesis. If I were a Russian general or leader, and if I thought that that's what was going on, that it was a matter of dissent, I would find those guys, and I'd put them in front of a firing squad in front of as many witnesses as I could find to get the message out. Because if that kind of thing were to go through the army, that kind of to say, hey, you know what, these guys might be onto something. If they can launch 4 missiles, least we can do is turn our guns on our lead. I mean, I don't know. I would think that I would want to stop that movement as soon as I could. And the Russians have a history of putting down dissent. So
yeah, absolutely. And there's massive mainstream media. Again, I'm just trying to be careful that I'm not an instrument of deep state here, repeating what they want you to hear and the narrative that they want you to hear as well. But it's said that there's massive discourse within the Russian military, and part of the reason that they're so ineffective is because they're all fighting with each other. And they're fighting with each other because it's so corrupt. And part of the reason that there's been so many failures with the Russian military over the last year is because of the corruption. If it wasn't so corrupt, the troops would have had the weapons they needed, they would have had the training that they needed, and they would have rolled up the Ukrainians long ago. But because it's so corrupt and because of all of these things, that's the reason why this is going on for such a long period of time. And we actually see that a little bit in Bakhmut as the Ukrainians are taking back the ground. I'm not going to bore you with the map today because it's just like such a small amount. But the point is the Ukrainians are taking back the ground where the Wagner troops are not located. So part of the reason that you don't see the Ukrainians on the offensive is because the weather has been terrible. That's the first thing. The ground has been actually too muddy, so you can't use maneuver warfare to close with and destroy the enemy, meaning the Russians, because they can't get their vehicles in there. And you simply can't cross the open ground, which is what the Russians have been doing, by the way. The Ukrainians call them zombie attacks, where 20 Russians would come out from behind a tree line and they would use artillery barrages to cover the advancing troops, and the Russians would walk behind the artillery landing in front of them until they got to the Ukrainian trenches. The artillery stopped, and the Russian troops are supposed to go forward and engage the Ukrainian troops, and then they just get mowed down by the machine guns that were there. And that would happen 20 or 30 people at a time, and it happened 5 or 6 times a day. And they're losing 500 or 600 troops a day in these human wave attacks. And you don't see that. No one talks about that. You hear the Ukrainian troops from the front line talk about it, and the reports of them talking about these zombie attacks, and you see the footage of the Ukrainians with machine guns, laying down effective fire 3 or 4 rounds at a time. So what are they shooting at? You see them doing that kind of side on. His mate's kind of filming him with a GoPro, and he's facing that way, going like that. And they're the Wagner troops. And the Wagner prisoners that have been sent into the meat grinder to try and take back the ground. And they've been effective because they've taken the city of Bakhmut, but it's cost them 20 or 30,000 people in the process, and they've got no more troops left to actually do anything. And now we're seeing that's been the ruse the whole time of the Ukrainians in Bakhmut, is that they look like they're being surrounded, but to the left or to the north and the south of them, to the left and the right of them, they've been surrounded by Russian troops. And now the Ukrainians have kind of given up the ground in Bakhmut to the Wagnerites. They're now attacking the Russian troops to the flanks in their north and their south, and they're taking back the ground, and the Russians are actually running away. There's footage of Ukrainians' advantage, and the Russians literally running away.
I need to ask your opinion on something. All right, so, I keep getting this image of the dog chasing the car, so what are you going to do when you catch the car? So I'm thinking, okay, so
you bite the wheel, man.
So these Ukrainians, let's say in theory, they have a huge success during their offensive, and they're standing there. They've gotten through the Donbass, and they're looking at actual Russian soil. They turn to each other and say, all right, so what now?
It happened in Kherson, and it happened in Kharkiv in the south and in the north, remember? They took back all of the land because the Russians evacuated, they left.
Yeah, but Kharkiv is part of Ukraine. Right?
Yeah.
So let's say they get across the river there, and are they going to turn to each other and say, so what do you think? Should we keep going? Yeah,
you have a thing in the infantry called the limit of exploitation, or the line of exploitation. So when you attack into a position, and we know exactly where the Russians are, right? We know how they're dug in, we know how deep they're dug in, what their trench systems look like, because we just put up a drone and we see it, right? So using combined arms, that's how we're going to assault that. So they'll use artillery and air to actually engage. They'll use helicopter to engage. And as they move up, they'll use engineers to clear all the mines out of the way. Then the armor goes in. Then the mobile infantry goes in behind all of that. And it all happens all at the same time. So that's what maneuver warfare is, and that's what combined arms warfare is. And what they'll have is they'll have a limit of exploitation. What we're trying to reach is this point on the map. Then they get to that point of exploitation, and what they do is they'll stop. And then they'll consolidate the position, they'll move up all the logistics, all the refueling, the resupplying, they'll dig in there, and then they'll move up again for the next thing. So that's part of the reason that this takes so long to do, is what happens if we get cleaned up here? What happens if we lose our assets there? And they play this eternal games of what if in the planning process. And that's where I think that this is the last war of its type that we'll ever see, because AI will take care of all of that. Up until now, it's been some general or a group of generals that know exactly what the enemy do, their tactics and their strategies, and they're playing it out on a chessboard. That as we move forward into the next phase of human existence, AI is what takes out all of that. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're using AI to help them make decisions with these things on the battlefield already.
Well, I wonder, I keep thinking, my experience with Chat GTP, well, I don't think I would listen to it. It won't let me. Okay, so, we've heard the foreign minister of Ukraine say it publicly at that, convention in Austria, when they asked him, what does victory look like? Oh, well, we want all of our territory back, including Crimea, and we want regime change in Russia. That's all? Okay. So, so the reason why I'm asking was, let's say, in theory, they do really well, the Ukrainians, and they manage to get the Donbass back. And now they're staring at Crimea and saying, you know what? Maybe we should go for Crimea. And if they did that's what actually worries me. So in that respect, I would not want to see them be successful, because I know how Putin views Crimea. For him, it is a solid red line in the sand. That is non-negotiable. That's Russian territory. And if he thought that he was going to lose Crimea, he would see that as an existential threat to Russia. He sees Crimea as part of Russia. And that's when the probability of some EMP or some kind of nuclear device goes up, accelerates the possibility of that. So I kind of would not want to see them take over Crimea, because personally, I can kind of anticipate what the real consequence of that would be. So your thoughts? Yeah,
I agree with you. It would be no different for them attacking Belgorod or Kursk in the north, which would be quite possible. That they could move up, same sort of distances. If you attack Belgorod to the north there, and you went after that part of the world, what's the difference going after Crimea? I don't think necessarily they'll make it all the way into Crimea. I think what you'll see them is they'll just divide from Zaporizhia down to Melitopol and down to Mariupol. They'll divide that, and they'll take out the bridge. And then they'll just say to Russians, all right, now you have to leave. We'll let you leave, and we're taking back all of this land. But to your point, the Russians view that as Russia. They always viewed that as Russia because it was handed over after World War II to the Ukraine. No, that's always been our land. They're Russian speakers, they're Russian everything, blah, blah. All of that aside, we live in a world where there's lines on a map. Yep. And the reason that wars happen are because of resources and assets. And the Russians needed Crimea because that gives them unfettered access to the Black Sea and gives them the ability to control all of that. And on the other side of the Black Sea, on the far eastern side of the Black Sea, it's too far away from anything to actually make any sort of impact. That's why Crimea is such a strategic location for the Russians. And you're quite right. I think if they cut the Russians off, that will be seen as an existential threat. And the problem that we face is that there's actually no... the only way that I can describe it is that we live in this capitalist democracy, and it sucks. There's corrupt politicians, there's liars, it's just an awful system that we live under. But it's still better than communism. It's still better than socialism. It's the least worst system that we have. In this war, there is no least worst outcome. That's the only same analogy I think of, because the Russians are going to get cut off in Crimea. So what is the result of that and the outcome? Well, that's an existential threat to the existence of the Russians, which means they're clear to use nuclear weapons. So will they use nuclear weapons against the Ukraine? Well, I don't think so, because I don't think that that's what they're trying to do. I think what they'll do is they'll attack NATO in the rear, and they'll stop the logistics and the ability for NATO to continue to resupply the Russians. There's some pretty big explosions in the last couple of days of Russians striking ammunition depots, and I've got some video of that on the Telegram channel, so I encourage you to go and look at that. And once again, the links are all in the description. I can't show that on YouTube, and it looks like a nuke going off. It looks like a low-yield tactical nuke going off. But what it is, it's a Russian strike on a Ukrainian ammunition depot that's been hit. And there's a couple of those that have been shown in the last couple of days. And the Russians know exactly where everything is stored. But if I take out some air bases in Germany and in Poland and I stop all of the logistics coming across, then it gives me the opportunity to say, hey, cut it out, stop it. But the problem that Russians have is they don't have the ability to hold the ground. You know, the role of the infantry is to seize and hold ground and to repel attack. But the Russians don't have the ability to seize and hold ground because the front line is just too big. So to your point, Ed, where does that leave us, man? Because if the Ukrainians they are successful with a counteroffensive, particularly in the south, in Zaporizhia, and they do cut them off and they drop the Kerch Bridge properly once and for all, then they're cutting them off. Now what happens? It's what you said. They get to the limit of exploitation. They get all the way to Mariupol. They take Mariupol back. Take Melitopol first, Mariupol next. They got access to the Azov Sea. They cut off Kerch Bridge. Russians are stuck in the middle. Logistics there. It's all right. Come and surrender. Otherwise, we're going to destroy you. Now what? Like, man, there's no good outcome.
For every bridge, for every road, for every hospital that's destroyed, China's saying, we have a better chance of getting that BRICS agreement now.
The way to fix the road from Belgrade all the way down to Mariupol is with the Belt and Road Initiative. They're going to fix it with the Belt and Road Initiative, and the Americans and the Europeans, their heads is going to explode because the Chinese are going to go in there and fix everything because they don't care about who's in charge. They just want to own the ground.
I think this is going to end with Zelenskyy, and he had his Maserati sweatshirt there. Maybe he'll be in I don't know. Beijing sweatshirt. I love Beijing sweatshirt. Sitting at a table signing the BRICS agreement. Or maybe I love Moscow sweatshirt. Wouldn't that be ironic?
Well, he's Russian. Well, he is a Russian speaker, isn't he?
I don't know. Is he? Probably.
Yeah, he is. He's a native Russian speaker. He lived in Russia for ages, man.
Yeah. I love Russia, and he's so cool. I love Russia as he's signing the BRICS agreement.
You know what will be the real telltale there? If Xi Jinping comes to some sort of negotiation to help out, comes out fucking popping out, Pooh Bear himself comes out. If Zelensky's wearing a suit, we know things have changed.
Good.
That's the leading indicator there.
You would think, these Ukrainian Russian women, they're notorious for their fashion, right? They're always beautiful. They all look like models. And you would think that she wouldn't let him go out the door wearing a sweatshirt.
Yeah, his wife is gorgeous, man. Have you seen her?
Yeah. And then you got little old 5'2", Vladimir with his.
I'm here to get millions and billions of dollars and your fighter jets. Yeah. Oh my God! Now we're going to look back at this comically in years.
Yeah. But I can kind of see, if he's a bachelor, he's rolling out of bed. There's no one there to keep an eye on. You're not going out the door like that. He's probably. But if he's married, he's got a fashion-conscious wife. You would think, I got to look respectable. I got to.
You have to, man. She won't have it.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it's all about. I'm a man of the people, and
that's what it is, really. That's exactly what it is. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps it up for another show today. Thank you for joining us here on the live. Everybody that was in the live, thanks so much. There's a couple of comments that have filtered through. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you supporting us and finding us here on the channel. We'd love it if you could like and subscribe to the channel. That always helps us out a whole bunch. And don't forget to come on over to Spotify, Telegram, and Rumble as well. And if you want to get some trolling and all sorts of craziness happening, come on over to Twitter and come into the Twitter sphere. I found that to be actually pretty good in the last couple of months. I've enjoyed a bit of Twitter action over there. I'm still trying to get Ed across for some reason. Do you even know what Twitter is, Ed?
I do not, actually.
Are you planning on finding out?
I hear everyone talking about it, and I think, what's that all about? Yeah.
Twitter is swamp central, man, for trolls and whatnot. But if you've got a Twitter account and you're plugged into the news like I am there over in that part of the world, there's lots to learn and lots to see. So come on over and follow us on Twitter at the Unspoken Truth AU, or Unspoken Truth Official is what it is. Pop on over and see it. All the links are down in the description, so click that link and follow us. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for spending some time here with us, and thank you so much, Ed. We'll see you again tomorrow. It's bye for now.
Same bat time, same bat channel.
See you, mate.
See you guys.